Okie doke, it's review time. So let's get started. Let's talk about all the water in the earth, all the water on the earth, or the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere. The hydrosphere. Hydro means water, sphere means earth. So all the water in the world is the hydrosphere. Now, we're talking about that. The earth itself, beautiful picture. The earth is divided between land and water. Okay? 75% of the earth is covered in water, and only 25% is land for us folks to live on. So the division of earth, of water, and land is 75% water, 25% land. So let's talk about all that water. 75% of the earth is covered in water, but how much of it can we use and what kind of water is it? Well, of all that water, if this is 100% of Earth's water, 97% is salt water, and only 3% is fresh. Okay? Only 3% is fresh water. All right, 3% fresh water. So this 97%, the 97% is mostly where? Mostly where? Of course, the oceans. Now, can we drink ocean water or salt water? No, make you sick. Um, it's just we can't drink it. It'll make you throw up. It's just bad news. Okay. Okay. Remember, one of the first things we did was we had that 5-gallon bucket with all the water in it, and we pretended that that 5-gallon bucket had all the Earth's water in it. So if we start out, if if this is all the Earth's water, this 5-gallon bucket, then when we got through measuring it out, we only had this amount of fresh water. So mostly of course, what we had was salt water, okay, and just a tiny amount of fresh. Okay, so we had a great big bucket that would represent all the salt water and just a couple little glasses that represented the fresh water, just a tiny amount compared to all the salt water. And uh, of the fresh water, 2/3 was frozen in glaciers and ice caps. So this amount was frozen in glaciers and ice caps, and this is all we get to use. And as we have learned, 97% is salt water, 3% is fresh, okay? And of the fresh water, 2/3 is frozen, and only 1/3 of the fresh water, 1/3 of the fresh water, or 1% of all water is usable. Okay? Only 1%, only 1% of all water is usable by humans. So let's go back over that. In the 5-gallon bucket, if that represented all the water in the world, we took out maybe a glass and a half that represented the fresh water. So all the rest of it was salt water. So what it gets down to is there's just a tiny amount of fresh water compared to the salt water, and the amount that we get to use is even smaller. We only get to use 1% of all the water on the earth. 1% or 1/3 of the fresh water, okay? So here's a question for you. What I want you to do, you see these three. We have frozen fresh water, we have salt water, and we have liquid fresh water, okay? Which one of those do we have the most of? Yep, we have more salt water than anything else, okay? Then what do we have the next most of? Glaciers and ice caps, frozen fresh water, okay? And the least of? Yep, liquid fresh water. So we have the most, then, and the least. So we have mostly salt water. Then we have a good bit of frozen fresh water, and the least that we have is liquid fresh water. Okay, we said that only 1% of the Earth's water is usable by humans. So I got a question for you. Why don't we run out of fresh water? I mean, think of all we use it for. Drinking, bathing, washing clothes, cooking, manufacturing, agriculture, which, by the way, most of the water that we use in the United States is used for agriculture. So with all this use, and since we only get to use 1%, why don't we run out? Must be a little thing called the water cycle. Water cycle keeps recycling the water over and over and over and over. Okay? Now, the oceans do play a very important part in the water cycle because most of the water that rains down on the earth, the rain came from the ocean through evaporation and stuff. And as we know, the only thing that evaporates is the water. The salt gets left behind in the ocean. Okay?
Okay, here's another important part of the water cycle. We usually talk about evaporation, condensation, precipitation, but we have to get that water back into the storage areas like the oceans and lakes and rivers. And so here we have runoff. As you can see, this water is running downhill. It's coming out of the grass. It's flowing on over, and it's going into like a stream, and it flows on downhill. Okay, let's see where it goes to. As you can see, there's a lot of water here. A lot of water. Okay. Look at all this water running downhill. You can see it's actually streaming there. Okay. That water will run on downhill, and it gets to a low area. It may soak into the ground, which is called infiltration. And infiltration helps refill the aquifers. But a lot of it, some of it may flow into streams, and streams will flow to rivers, and then the rivers eventually wind up back in the ocean where it gets stored.
So after watching this video, I want to ask you a question. Did you ever wonder how the ocean got salty in the first place? Well, think about this runoff. This runoff is running across the ground, and when it rains, it helps break up the rocks, and so from weathering, that when the rain breaks up rocks, it's called weathering, and through weathering and erosion, little tiny bits of salt get soaked out of the ground, and then this little bit of salt goes into the runoff, and then when this runoff flows into the ocean, it adds a tiny bit of salt to it. Then we have evaporation. The water leaves the ocean, but it leaves that little bit of salt behind. Then it runs over and it gets some more salt, and so over millions and millions and millions of years, the ocean has become as salty as it is today. Okay, one more thing we want to discuss. When we look around, as we travel around the countryside, or we look at pictures and magazines and all this, it seems like there's an incredible amount of water on the planet. But we have to remember, we only live on 25% of the planet, and while it seems like a lot, there's really not that much fresh water. But let's quickly put together a list that we've already done before. Where is the fresh water? Okay, most of it is in glaciers and ice caps. That's one place, like Antarctica. All right. Another place would be groundwater. Okay, that's where we get our drinking water from. Groundwater, that is the second largest source of water on Earth, of fresh water on Earth. Number 3, we have lakes, which we like to swim in or go boating. We have rivers, okay. And, of course, we have the atmosphere. The atmosphere, which is crucial for us having a water cycle. Oops. Okay, so glaciers and ice caps, that's where most of the fresh water is. 2/3, okay. Then the little bit that we get to use is 2, 3, and 4. The groundwater, which is where we get most of our drinking water from. Lakes, rivers, and the atmosphere. Okay, so very quickly, let's recap all this. So, the Earth is divided up in land and water, okay, and we said 75% is water, 25% is land. And then we said that of all the water in the world, 97% is what? Salt water. And only 3% is what? Fresh water. Okay? Okay. Now, of the fresh water, and this little chart down here is strictly the 3%, okay? This is the fresh water. All right. 1/3 of that, all right, 2/3, let's do this. 2/3 would be the glaciers and ice caps. Can't read it, sorry about that. And only 1/3 is usable. Okay, only 1/3 or 1% of all the water on Earth. Okay? So go back over and rewatch this video if you need to. Be sure to ask me if you